Well, good morning. Good to see you all here this morning. Tiny bit of mist or something outside. Wish it would turn into rain. Beggars can't be choosers. God takes care of us. We are in Judges chapter 9 this morning. If you would like to turn there. Before just jumping into the text, so chapter 9 is quite long, 57 verses. It's about Abimelech, who is a descendant of Gideon, and we have just wrapped up the whole Gideon saga. Last time we had ended with the death of Gideon. Abimelech, you're probably a little bit familiar with this story. Sorry, Matt, I'm just a little hot, I think. Thank you. Keep having to pull back my voice because I sound loud to myself. Abimelech is not, there's nothing good about Abimelech. He's the descendant of Gideon. And so that prompts me to ask the question, why do we even have these 57 verses about this guy? So I want to say a little bit about that before we jump into this account. I think that chapter 9 in Judges demonstrates for us the Canaanization of Israel. They become like the Canaanites. We see that repeatedly in here. There's no mention of Yahweh in the entire chapter, although God does act. There is reference to him. Interestingly enough, he's referred to as Elohim in this chapter, not as Yahweh. Coincidence? I suspect not, but so we have, even in the story of Gideon, as well known and wonderful as some of those things are, I think you can see kind of a downward spiral with him. And let me just point out one example, which would be his hometown of Ophrah. When we start the Gideon saga, Ophrah is the location of a Baal worshiping center that is owned by a clan, basically Gideon's father. So there's this little local clan that worships Baal there. Do you remember how we end the Gideon saga with Ophrah again? Gideon sets up something, an ephod, some kind of, image. It's a worship something. And the text tells us that all Israel played the harlot because of that. In other words, they were unfaithful to God. They worshiped. So the contrast is we begin with a clan that's worshiping Baal and Asherah. And we end with, after Gideon's done, all Israel being sucked into this at the same place. So what's going to happen when his son arrives on the scene? And it's worse than what happened with Gideon. One other interesting thing, again, I'm not sure how long it's been since you read the Abimelech story. By the end, he is killed by a woman. That is his demise. Does that remind you of anything else in Judges, a similar account? Yeah, Sisera, Deborah and Barak. And Yael or Jael is the hero and kills the guy with a tent peg through the forehead. So it's almost like things have reversed. Now it's the purported king of Israel who is killed by a woman instead of Israel's enemy. And yet, Abimelech kind of is Israel's enemy, even though he is an Israelite. But again, just a broad picture, I think this chapter demonstrates how far Israel has fallen and become like their Canaanite relatives. Neighbors, thank you. That's the word I was looking for, Tricia. So keep that in mind as we go through here. We see God act in this chapter, but it's not to deliver. It's to give retribution to Israelites, and that's a difficult thing. Okay, so Judges chapter 9. I didn't even put a slot in here for Abimelech. He reigns for 3 years. It would hardly show up on my timeline, but we are around the end of the 12th century BC. Judges chapter 9, starting with verse 1. Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, can't get 3 words in without pausing. Throughout this entire chapter, Gideon is referred to as Jerubbaal. And we know that's his name from earlier. It's an alternate name for him. But I think it's just another sign. The name means let Baal contend. And that's the way he's referred to in this chapter. Okay. Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives, and he spoke to them and to the whole clan of the household of his mother's father, saying, "Speak now in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem. Which is better for you, that 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, rule over you, or that 1 man rule over you? Also, remember that I'm your bone and your flesh." And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem. And they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our relative." And they gave him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on 1 stone. But Jotham, the youngest of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem and all Beth Millo assembled together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar which was in Shechem. Okay, so I want to say a few things about this. This is ancient Shechem. Let's see. If we move, so we've got Mount Gerizim in the foreground. That's what the photographer is standing on. Mount Ebal in the background. You might remember Joshua set up an altar there with the Israelites. They rehearsed the covenant here. Shechem is in between these 2 mountains. If you go to the west, this direction, you would walk or drive into the modern Palestinian city of Nablus. You've maybe heard that name mentioned in the news in the past 5-10 years. It's a very large city and kind of a center. Sometimes, as a tourist, you can get in here to see Shechem. Other times you cannot, depending on the political climate of the day. This is looking from the east toward the west. There's a traditional site of Jacob's well there. Shechem is highlighted for you, otherwise it would be quite difficult to see. But you can see how the 2 mountains flank this little town. And here's part of the ancient tell. You can see the circular nature of it, where the fortification walls run around the outside. Oops. So not all of it has been excavated. This massive structure that is visible right here, I've highlighted it in red, is the temple of Baal Berith that is mentioned here. I'll come back to that in a moment. Out in front is this massive standing stone, and that is this one, which is a cover slide I've been using for the book of Judges. It's featured here in this chapter. This is a ground view of that temple. Again, we'll come back to this. So he goes to the elders of the city, or, well, actually to some of his relatives who are then to go to the elders of the city. And they like his proposal. In essence, he makes two arguments. One is that rule by one guy is better than rule by 70. Is that true? Yeah. I would say it's not necessarily true. Depends on the situation, but he makes that case, and they kind of like it. The other is rule by a relative is better than rule by a foreigner. Okay. You can see the appeal in it. Yeah, it flatters them. They think probably they would have some pull, some sway with him because he's a relative that they maybe wouldn't have with the others. So they give him 70 pieces of silver. This is the form that silver was used in that day. They didn't mint coins yet or anything like that. We'd sometimes refer to it as hack silver. It was measured purely by weight. That's how you would determine how much to give somebody, was by how much it weighed. And they had scales and other little weights that they could figure that out with. Here's another example of some silver that was pulled out of a hoard. It doesn't say, the assumption would be that these are shekels. These pieces, how do you count 70? What size are they? Well, it's probably a reference to the weight. So the leaders here of Shechem, I find this kind of interesting. This was the temple of Baal Berith. Berith, as a Hebrew word, means covenant. Baal could be a reference to a particular Canaanite god. The word is also used in Hebrew just to refer to a leader, a master, or sometimes even a husband. There are cases where a husband will refer to a wife will refer to her husband as Baal. And it would be translated as husband. So this is we actually ran into this earlier in chapter 8, verse 33. As soon as Gideon was dead, the sons of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal Berith, Baal of the covenant, their god. Well, this is clearly not Yahweh. So they are going astray there. Interestingly enough, these leaders that are mentioned lost my place here. In verse 3, speak in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem. It's the Baals, the lords, the masters, the guys that run the city. So verse 5, they killed all of Abimelech's brothers on one stone. Do you see the significance of that? He hires these reckless people. They don't just force their way in the city gate and then just start stabbing everybody that they think is one of these relatives. It's much more coordinated than that. They round them up and execute them one at a time in a very purposeful way. Otherwise, you can't kill them all on one stone. Do you recollect when Saul was fighting? It's in the context of that stupid command he gave not to eat anything until the battle's over. He heard that some of the people who were famished were killing animals, slaughtering animals, and eating them with the blood still in them. And so his solution was, roll me a giant stone to my camp place here, and everybody come and kill their animal on this stone, and we'll drain the blood and make sure you do it properly. That's the closest parallel we have in the Old Testament to this killing of 70 men on one stone. Very deliberate, purposeful event. So the guy is just brutal. This is difficult even to ponder. It's such a heinous act. And these are his relatives, and I'm assuming there was quite a bit of either hatred there, or he simply didn't have a relationship with them and didn't care. He was a half-brother, so his mother is referred to as Gideon's concubine, and she lived in Shechem, or was from Shechem, whereas Gideon lived in Ophrah, which is miles away. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, the text clearly tells us one gets away who apparently is a legitimate son of Gideon, not an illegitimate. So the children of concubines were typically not considered able to inherit. That's what I mean by legitimate. So apparently Jotham was a legitimate heir. So yes, that would reduce it. The way I read it, the author is painting big picture. And when he tells us one got away, he assumes we're gonna understand, yeah, that's one of the 70. Okay, technically he killed 69. That's how I would take it. Or maybe 68 if you count Abimelech as one of the 70 sons. I'm not quite sure what to do with that either. Would somebody like him be counted in the summary we had in chapter 8? Sure, yeah. Yeah, there wasn't one woman that bore 70 sons and no daughters. Yeah. Yes, long since dead. I don't know if you care about this. Another somewhat parallel, not the killing on one stone thing, but when Jehu took over as king of the northern 10 tribes, this is right at the end. In fact, he ends the Ahab dynasty. One of his first acts is to send a message to the leaders at Samaria, where Ahab's descendants had reigned, and say, if you guys don't want besieged and wiped out, send me the heads of the 70 sons of Ahab, the 70 descendants of Ahab. There's some other interesting parallels between the two accounts. Obviously, there's some differences too. Jehu was acting on behalf of God. God had sent through Elisha to anoint him as the new king, and he fulfilled prophecy by killing Jezebel and some of those kinds of things, and even ending the dynasty of Ahab, the Omride dynasty. But some interesting parallels there too, one of which is that there were 70 of them. If you don't know how that story ends, the leaders of Samaria did indeed collect these 70 descendants of Ahab and behead them and send their heads over to Jezreel, where Jehu was king, and thereby averted the destruction of their city. So we have here, this is a geographical, archaeological thing. We have in verse 6 a reference to the men of Shechem and all Beit Milo. And Beth, of course, is house. What is the house of Milo? Or we have a number of references related to Jerusalem about various kings that rebuilt the Milo in Jerusalem. And archaeologists consider that to most likely refer to a platform on which an important building like a temple or a palace sat that would support it structurally and make a nice flat area. And we have one of those in Jerusalem. There's this stone structure is called the stepped stone structure, real descriptive, that supported the Canaanite and eventually the Davidic palace there. So here at Shechem, we have something similar, and I think this is probably what the Beit Milo is. This is the large temple of Baal Berith, this square, and then there's a large platform out here, and here's the standing stone that they discovered out there. That seems... Okay, why do I get so excited about this kind of stuff? There are very few places where we can read in the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament about a building and then go look at the remains of that building. And this is one of those places. That's why I get so excited about it. An actual structure that's mentioned in the Bible that we can go look at. I mean, it's the foundation stones of this place. Here's an artist's reconstruction of what this would have looked like. You can see the perimeter wall around this massive fortress temple. This thing will be destroyed later in the chapter. We won't get to that today. But the destruction of the temple, fortress temple that we see the remains of here date to almost precisely the time of Abimelech. And it is a fortress temple. I think I have on your handout the dimensions of this thing. 70 by 86, and walls that are nearly 17 feet thick. That's pretty huge. And the reason they would make walls that thick is because there's a second floor, and that helps support. And this place was a fortress type. Here's a schematic that shows you a few interesting things. I'll try and point these out in the pictures, but you can see, sorry, pointing the wrong way. You can see the pillars on the inside that helped hold up, a couple of towers out at the front, 2 standing stones, and these are religious things. They appear in religious contexts all the time, temples. So this is not just a fortress. It also is a religious temple structure. They found remains of an altar out front, and then this massive standing stone that, I mean, it's broken now, but I've showed pictures of that numerous times. And then the text will mention somewhere around here, we don't know exactly where because it's gone, but this oak of the pillar. And the perimeter wall, I think, is what helps identify this as the Beit Milo, the elevated structure on which this temple sat. let's see, we are at the northwest corner here, so the back, sorry, Matt told me I needed to point over here, and he's right. So this is the back of that temple. You can see some of the pillars inside, and then out front, here's that large standing stone, which apparently was near this oak, probably a sacred oak. Some of the inside of this temple. Again, just astounding that we have uncovered a structure that is described here in the Bible. This is one of the standing stones that's found out in front of the temple. We think they probably symbolized a god. We have two of them flanking the temple here, the temple entrance, perhaps Baal and Asherah. They're typically not carved, they're just massive stones that are set up, but they appear in religious contexts all over there. So here's the other one, and then in the background you can see the broken but massive standing stone. And that may be the pillar that's talked about here. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving along. We ended with verse 6. Verse 7, now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim. That's just to the south of this town. And he lifted up his voice and he called out, and this is what he said to them, listen to me, O men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. Once the trees went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, should I leave my fatness with which God and men are honored, and go to wave over the trees? In other words, no, I won't. Then the trees said to the fig tree, you come, reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go to wave over the trees? Then the trees said to the vine, you come, reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I leave my new wine, which cheers God and men, and go to wave over the trees? Finally, all the trees said to the bramble, you come, reign over us. And the bramble, being tricky, said to them, if in truth you are anointing me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, may fire come out from the bramble and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Do you get where he's going with this story? You know who the bramble is? Abimelech. Who are the other trees? Well, they're not named as specific people. What do they represent? Yeah, Shechemites who are capable, productive members of society, worthy, good, those kinds of things. The point is not to say, oh, there's a bunch of good guys in Shechem. The point is to say, y'all picked the worst of the worst, right? The bramble. Yeah. Well, this area is pretty conducive to that. Of course, today we've got jets going overhead, and we've got traffic, bus, car, tractor noise, people yelling, whatever. A little hard to imagine the quietness in that day, but you could stand on the mountainside and be heard. It might take a little bit to get everybody's attention. Yoo-hoo! I don't know what he did, but I got just a few pictures here. We don't tend to have these kinds of trees around Nebraska, so this is an olive tree, and of course they have olive fruits. These are green. I don't know if you guys prefer green or black olives. Of course, black. The most useful thing about olives in antiquity was that they could produce oil. So here's a bag of freshly picked olives, and they would run a stone over them to mash them, throw them into a fiber bag, and press them. This is actually an ancient press. You can see the bags layered up there, putting stones out on the end. I've seen Greek pottery paintings of this kind of thing, and also a guy hanging on with hands and feet, almost looks like a monkey, just trying to get some extra weight on that beam to squeeze out the olive oil. But olive oil was precious. In fact, it was a cash crop. They could take oil like this, it lasted, it preserved well, and ship it all over. They had a big market down in Egypt, but other places as well. So theoretically, you could eat olives fresh, but it was the oil that made them, and that's the reference here to fatness. And there were tons of uses for olive oil in antiquity, from cooking to lighting to perfumes and ointments and medicine. It just went on and on. The second is a fig tree. I've never seen one of these grow around here. About our only exposure to figs is fig Newtons. It's aren't bad. Kind of fun now and then. Some freshly picked figs. I don't even see these at Aldi very often. And of course, the third type of tree, if you will, is the vine, the grapevine. And of course, the usefulness of vines is the juice that their fruit produces. So it is typically harvested, picked, dumped into a large vat, a flat area. People, hopefully with clean feet, step on them, press them, crush them to extract the juice, and then that pours out through a little hole at the bottom of the wine press. And of course, in Jotham's story, rather than picking anybody that was productive, the Shechemites picked a bramble to be king over all the trees. And a bramble is some kind of stickery, thorny thing. This is actually a thistle. Could be a bramble type thing. And of course, the bramble says, if you guys betray me, if you aren't serious about this, may fire come out from you and consume all the trees, he says, of Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon, which are the grandest and mightiest of all trees. It's a Jewish holiday. It's kind of a minor holiday. One of the things they do is create bonfires. I believe they do haircuts by tradition at this as well. I couldn't even tell you where it comes from, Lag BaOmer, but it's a minor Jewish holiday. But you weren't supposed to be looking at that. You're supposed to be looking at the fire, which is consuming wood. This is a little bit absurd, of course. How can the trees take refuge in the shade of a bramble? That's one of his conditions. Well, they can't. I mean, it's absurd. And I think the point is, how could a guy like Abimelech possibly lead you guys in ways that are good? He invokes a curse on them if they're just playing games with him. And then he gives us an interpretation. I'll pick up in 16. Now, therefore, in case you guys have not understood my word picture here. If you have dealt in truth and integrity in making Abimelech king, if you've dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have dealt with him as he deserved, for my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered you from the hand of Midian, but you have risen against my father's house today and have killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his maidservant, which, by the way, is kind of making fun of Abimelech, the son of his maidservant, king over the men of Shechem, because he's your relative. If then you have dealt in truth and integrity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume the men of Shechem and Beit Millo, and let fire come out from the men of Shechem and from Beit Millo and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham escaped and fled and went to Be'er and remained there because of Abimelech, his brother. Now, we didn't read there the word curse, but it does appear later in the chapter, at the end of the chapter. This is referred back to as a curse that came true. And, of course, that's not hard to see. Jotham's question is rhetorical. He's not really asking, have you dealt well with Jerubbaal? He knows they have not. And so he invokes this curse on them, and it's basically mutual self-destruction. And you know what? He's on God's side when he pronounces this curse, because God is going to bring this to pass. Verse 22. Now Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. Then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, in order that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood might be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. And the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed anyone who passed by along the road, and it was told to Abimelech. Oh, now that's interesting. Here it becomes apparent for the first time that Abimelech is not living in Shechem. He's elsewhere. We'll see this made very explicit later on, but he's not living in the town that he's king over. And one of the interesting things about that is it implies he's king over a larger area, not just the city of Shechem. He's trying to take in multiple groups. This statement, God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the rulers. A couple things about that. One, it clearly shows God is involved in this. God is not just hands off, you guys do whatever you want. Even in this ugly, ugly situation, God is working. Most versions, English versions, go with the wooden translation, evil spirit. Evil is an interesting word. We always think of that as something that is morally wicked, bad spiritually. And so then we start to wonder, well, how can God send an evil spirit? That word evil can also be used in other ways, though, to describe more generically stuff like natural disasters. By natural, you know what I mean. I mean giant forest fire, a tornado, earthquake, those kind of calamities. And Daniel Block prefers to use the term calamitous spirit, like stirring up calamity, as opposed to stirring up or inducing people to do what is evil. And I think that's probably a good way to go. And there are some English versions that do that. The Contemporary English Bible, God stirred up ill will between, is the way they translated that. The New English Translation, God sent a spirit to stir up hostility between them. The NIV, to stir up animosity. New Living Translation sent a spirit that stirred up trouble. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a possibility, that it's not a good spirit, but God releases one that's already evil to just, you do your thing here. That could be. I did throw in a couple of pictures here of ancient depictions of demons. This they refer to as Pazuzu, an Assyrian, Mesopotamian demon, but they were familiar with these kinds of things and even represented them in their art. So something along these lines that God sent. Yeah. That's a great question. I think in part there's just such a deep-seated human knowledge that there is good and evil. We just know that intuitively. Was this kind of thing from something somebody saw, either physically or in a dream or something like that? Or is it purely, they sometimes depicted protective beings in somewhat the same way. We usually refer to them as like a genie or something like that with wings, and of course then you start to think about the biblical cherubim and those sorts of things, and it's like, is there some tradition handed down here somewhere that went off the tracks and developed into something really strange? I don't know. I've said more than I know already, so that's all you get. We do have other examples of God sending a spirit of this type. You remember Saul. God sent an evil spirit to torment him, or calamitous spirit, a few different times. 2 Kings 19, a spirit placed by God caused Sennacherib to hear a rumor and return to his own land, and ultimately his death. 2 Kings 22, a deceiving spirit volunteers to fool Ahab into his death at remote Gilead. So in all these cases, it seems like these beings stir up some kind of emotional response. They don't actually do the evil, but they stir up something in the heads, in the minds of those that are doomed, if you will. David, he plays his harp, and it soothes Saul. And then eventually Saul starts doing crazy things like throwing a spear at him. But the ultimate, the way this was expressed then was the men of Abimelech began to act out, if you will. We're going to rob people. So they would sit up on the mountain, and you can see a long way out along the road, and there's a major trade route that passes through here. And they'd see somebody coming along. Okay, guys, run down. There'll be one in about 10 minutes. Get on either side of the road, hide in the ditch. The caravan gets halfway through, jump up, kill a bunch of people, run people off, take all the stuff. Well, that puts a real damper on trade, right? And there's less tax then for the king, and so there's a bunch of rabble-rousers. It's not good for Abimelech, who's trying to rule this area. So, almost done. I'd put it up here instead of asking you to turn there. You can turn there if you want. Judges chapter 2. It came about when the judge died, so this is big picture stuff, that the Israelites would turn back and act more corruptly than their fathers in following other gods to serve them and bow down to them, and they didn't abandon their practices or their stubborn ways. This is fulfillment of that kind of thing. It's ugly. It's not the way things ought to be. In chapter 3, the sons of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. They took their daughters for themselves as wives. They gave their own daughters to their sons, and they served their gods. So Gideon, a guy that we like to think of as a good guy, has a concubine in Shechem. She's almost certainly Canaanite, not Israelite. A prime example of this kind of thing. Intermarrying, so not being faithful to their marital covenants, not being faithful to their covenant with Yahweh. So we are just the Canaanization of Israel. It's really bad. Just a couple things. Gideon cannot bear the full blame for what Abimelech did, but it does seem he contributed to this whole debacle. Now you could ask the question, should he even have had a son with this concubine? Or 70, I mean, this has gone so far off the rails. So I don't think you can finger Gideon for all of this, but he certainly didn't help by the way he acted, especially toward the end of his life. Second thing, God is at work even in really ugly situations like this one. And again, he's not working to deliver Israel or that kind of thing. What God does is brings about the curse that Jotham pronounced. You guys are being evil. The men of Shechem are being evil. You're going to destroy each other. That's God's action, sending a spirit to bring that to happen. As Hosea says, those who sow the wind reap the whirlwind. And this is where I think we can kind of touch this a little bit. The things that we do, the decisions we make, the priorities we have affect our lives. You do evil, you'll get consequences that go with evil. You do what's righteous, you'll get consequences that go with righteous. I understand what I just said is a little bit general, proverbial. There are guys like the Apostle Paul that end up giving their life for the gospel. We may not, from a worldly view, see that as a good thing, but roll with me on this. God blesses righteousness, and he does not bless evil. So, something to consider. How am I living my life? We're all sinful. Am I working to mitigate the evil in my life? Am I working to do more righteousness? That's what you want. It's an issue of the will. It's an issue of obedience. The things I read, the stuff I listen to on the radio, the movies I watch, the things that come out of my mouth, the things I spend my time thinking about, the places I put my money, the people I hang out with. Just trying to put some feet on some specific things to think about. Give it some consideration. We'll continue with this chapter, Lord willing, in a couple of weeks. But I'm over. I'll pray. Lord, thanks for your word. Even disturbing sections like this that are ugly, they show us who we really are in many ways, our tendencies at least. Help us to give this consideration. Help us to make choices to live righteously, to follow you, to be faithful to you, to obey you. And we ask for your blessing on us as we make that effort. Strengthen and encourage us. Give us resolve to do what is right. And pray that you would increase our obedience and our worth to you as your children, not in the ultimate sense, but in the touchable sense. We would like to hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant," when this is all done. And so we ask for your strength toward that end. In your name I pray. Amen.